Welcome back to the channel, thinkers, explorers, and truth seekers. Today we are embarking on a profound intellectual journey into one of the most disruptive, eye-opening, and essential books of the modern era. We are diving deep into the mind of Nassim Nicholas Taleb and dissecting his masterpiece, The Black Swan. If you have ever felt like the world is completely unpredictable, if you have ever been blindsided by a massive global event, or if you simply want to understand the hidden forces that shape our lives, our economies, and our histories, you need to hear this. Get comfortable, grab a notebook, and let us explore the impact of the highly improbable, the illusion of the known world. For millennia, people in the old world operated under a very simple, very rigid assumption about nature. Every single swan they had ever seen was white. It was a completely undisputed fact. The historical record, the scientific observations, and the collective common sense of an entire civilization agreed that a swan, by definition, must be white. The idea of a differently colored swan was not just unlikely, it was considered an absolute impossibility. But then, explorers sailed to Australia, and they saw a black swan. In a single moment, a single observation completely shattered millions of previous observations. Taleb uses this historical event as the foundational metaphor for his entire philosophy. A black swan event is not just a bird. It is a specific type of occurrence that shares three distinct characteristics. First, it is an outlier. It lies completely outside the realm of regular expectations, because nothing in the past could have convincingly pointed to its possibility. Second, it carries an extreme impact. When it happens, it changes the world, the market, or your life in a massive way. Third, and perhaps most dangerously, human nature forces us to concoct explanations for its occurrence after the fact, making it explainable and predictable in hindsight. Think about the major events of the past century: the sudden rise of the Internet, the devastating financial crash of 2008, or the sudden geopolitical shifts that redraw maps overnight. None of these were predicted by the so-called experts. Yet, after they happened, every analyst on television sat in front of a camera and explained exactly why the event was inevitable. Taleb warns us that we suffer from a massive delusion. We believe we understand the world. We believe we can predict the future. But in reality, our lives are dictated by these massive, unforeseen outliers. We are blind to the black swans, and that blindness leaves us incredibly vulnerable. The tale of the Thanksgiving turkey. To truly understand how we are deceived by our own experiences, Taleb introduces us to one of the most powerful analogies in modern philosophy. Let us imagine a turkey. From the very first day this turkey is born, a human farmer comes out to the barn and feeds it. The turkey, being a logical creature, observes this event. Day 2 arrives, and the farmer feeds the turkey again. Day 3, the same thing happens. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks turn into months, the turkey builds a highly robust statistical model of its universe. Every single piece of data it gathers confirms its core belief. Humans are benevolent creatures whose only purpose is to feed turkeys. The turkey feels safe, secure, and completely confident in its understanding of the world. In fact, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the turkey is at its absolute maximum level of confidence. It has 1,000 days of historical data proving that tomorrow will be just like today. But on that Wednesday afternoon, something happens that the turkey never saw coming. The farmer does not bring food. The farmer brings an axe. This story perfectly illustrates the philosophical problem of induction. Just because something has happened in the past does not mean it will continue to happen in the future. We look at a stock market that has gone up for 10 years, and we assume it will always go up. We look at a stable government and assume it will always be stable. We are exactly like the turkey, using our limited historical data to build models of the future that are fundamentally flawed. The turkey experienced a Black Swan event. It was completely unexpected. It had a terminal impact, and it proved that past performance is never a guarantee of future survival. Taleb challenges us to ask ourselves every single day, in what areas of our lives are we acting like the turkey? 2. Different worlds. To understand why we get blindsided so often, we have to understand that there are two very different environments in which randomness operates. Taleb divides the world into two distinct provinces, Mediocristan and Extremistan. Understanding the difference between these two worlds is the key to surviving the modern age. Mediocristan is the world we evolved to understand. It is a world where physical limits and boundaries apply. Think about human height. If you gather 1,000 randomly selected people in a stadium, and you calculate their average height, you get a reliable number. Now, let us say you add the tallest man in recorded history to that stadium. His presence will barely change the overall average. In Mediocristan, no single observation can meaningfully impact the aggregate. This world is governed by the bell curve. Events cluster around the average, and extreme deviations are so rare that they can essentially be ignored. Calories consumed, physical weight, and running speeds all belong to Mediocristan. Extremistan, however, is a completely different beast. This is the world of information, economics, and modern interconnected systems. In Extremistan, physical limits do not exist, and a single observation can absolutely dominate the total. Let us look at wealth instead of height. If you take those same 1,000 people in a stadium and calculate their average net worth, you get a certain number. But if you invite the richest person on the planet into that stadium, the average skyrockets. Suddenly, one single data point represents 99% of the total wealth in the room. In Extremistan, the extremes dictate everything. Book sales, financial markets, internet traffic, and social media influence all belong to Extremistan. The fatal flaw of modern society, according to Taleb, is that we treat Extremistan as if it were Mediocristan. We use risk models designed for physical traits to predict financial markets. We use the bell curve where it absolutely does not belong. When you apply the rules of Mediocristan to the chaotic world of Extremistan, you are guaranteeing that a black swan will eventually destroy you. The narrative fallacy. If the world is so incredibly random, why does it feel so orderly? Why do we feel like we understand history? Taleb explains this through a psychological trap he calls the narrative fallacy. Human beings are biologically wired to love stories. We hate raw, unorganized data. It makes us feel anxious and out of control. So, when we look back at the past, our brains automatically connect the dots. We invent cause and effect relationships where none actually exist. When a historical event happens, historians look backward and write a beautiful, coherent story about exactly why it happened. They point to the political tensions, the economic indicators, and the social movements. They make the event look like an inevitable chain of dominoes falling over. But the truth is, the people living in that moment had no idea what was going to happen. The world was a chaotic mess of infinite variables. The narrative fallacy is incredibly dangerous because it makes us arrogant. If we believe we can perfectly explain the past through simple cause and effect stories, we naturally assume we can use those same stories to predict the future. We read biographies of successful billionaires and assume that if we just wake up at 5 in the morning and drink green juice like they did, we will also become billionaires. We ignore the massive role of hidden luck and random chance in their success. To protect yourself, you must learn to view history as a series of random, chaotic events rather than a neat and tidy novel. You must accept that the world is far more complex and far less predictable than your brain wants you to believe. The graveyard of silent evidence. Another massive blind spot in our perception of the world is what Taleb calls silent evidence. We only ever see the winners. The losers are buried in a graveyard of silence, and because we do not see them, we completely fail to factor them into our understanding of risk. Imagine looking at a magnificent ancient temple that survived thousands of years of earthquakes and wars. You might look at that temple and conclude that ancient architects were absolute masters of engineering. What you do not see are the thousands of other temples built by those same architects that collapsed into rubble centuries ago. The surviving temple is not necessarily the result of superior skill. It might simply be the result of survivorship bias. This happens everywhere in modern life. We look at the handful of successful college dropouts who started massive tech companies in their garages, and we conclude that dropping out of college is a great path to wealth. We completely ignore the tens of thousands of other people who dropped out of college, started businesses in their garages, went completely bankrupt, and never had a magazine article written about them. The media only interviews the lottery winner. They never interview the millions of people who bought a ticket and lost. By ignoring the silent evidence of failure, we drastically overestimate our own chances of success and drastically underestimate the amount of risk involved in our endeavors. We mistake luck for skill because the unlucky are never heard from. The Ludic Fallacy and the casino. Many people believe that because they understand the mathematics of gambling, they understand the mathematics of life. Taleb destroys this idea with a concept he names the Ludic Fallacy. The word ludic comes from the Latin word for games. In a casino, randomness is sterilized. It is domesticated. The rules are known, the probabilities are fixed, and the worst-case scenario is perfectly defined. If you play roulette, you know exactly how many red and black slots are on the wheel. You know exactly what the odds are. But real life does. not operate like a casino. In real life, the rules are constantly changing. The odds are completely unknown. And the worst-case scenario is often something you cannot even imagine. In a casino, the biggest risk is that you lose the chips in front of you. In real life, a true Black Swan event can wipe out your wealth, your health, and your entire reality from a direction you never even considered. Taleb tells a brilliant story about a massive casino in Las Vegas. The casino spent millions of dollars on sophisticated security systems, cameras, and statistical analysis software to catch card counters and cheaters. They wanted to protect themselves against the known risks. But what were their actual biggest financial losses? One loss happened because a performer was attacked by his own trained tiger during a show, resulting in a massive settlement. Another massive loss happened because a contractor forgot to submit a piece of paperwork to the local government, almost shutting down the entire building. None of these events had anything to do with the mathematics of casino games. They were unpredictable, real-world events. Relying on textbook probability to navigate the real world is like studying a map of Paris to navigate the jungles of the Amazon. It is the wrong tool for a much more dangerous environment. The arrogance of the experts. If the world is this unpredictable, why do we have so many experts telling us exactly what is going to happen? Taleb introduces us to the concept of epistemic arrogance, which is a fancy way of saying we are incredibly overconfident in our own knowledge. Epistemic arrogance is not just about what we know. It is about the massive gap between what we actually know and what we think we know. Taleb spares no mercy for the professional predicting classes. He takes direct aim at economists, stock market analysts, political forecasters, and corporate risk managers. Through rigorous data analysis, he shows that in complex environments, expert predictions are often no better than random chance. Think about a stock market analyst projecting the price of a barrel of oil 5 years into the future. They build complex spreadsheets, they analyze supply chains, and they issue a confident prediction. But their model cannot possibly account for a sudden geopolitical revolution, a massive technological breakthrough in energy, or a global pandemic that shuts down travel. The problem is not that the experts are stupid. The problem is that they refuse to acknowledge the limits of their own models. They are wearing blinders. They suffer from the illusion that because they have a PhD and complex mathematics, they can tame the chaotic nature of Extremistan. Taleb urges us to be incredibly skeptical of anyone in a suit who tells you they can predict the future of a complex system. The true mark of wisdom is the ability to say, "I do not know." The only thing you can truly predict is that the unpredictable will eventually happen. The danger of the bell curve. To truly understand why the experts get it so wrong, we must look at the mathematical tool they all use, the Gaussian distribution, commonly known as the bell curve. In the world of Mediocristan, the bell curve is a beautiful and useful tool. It perfectly describes human height, standardized test scores, and manufacturing defects. It assumes that most data points will cluster around the middle, and that extreme outliers drop off so rapidly that they become virtually impossible. But modern finance and economics adopted the bell curve to model the stock market. This, according to Taleb, is one of the greatest intellectual frauds in human history. The Bell curve ignores large deviations. It assumes that a massive market crash is a one-in-a-billion-year event. But if you look at the actual history of financial markets, massive crashes happen every 10 or 20 years. The math used by Wall Street risk managers fundamentally assumes that black swans cannot exist. When a trader models their portfolio risk using the bell curve, they are literally blinding themselves to reality. They are building a fortress, designed to withstand a gentle rainstorm, completely unaware that a massive hurricane is inevitable. Taleb argues that we must abandon Gaussian statistics when dealing with Extremistan. We must recognize that the tails of the distribution are fat, meaning that extreme events are far more common and far more devastating than traditional mathematics will ever admit. Relying on the bell curve in a complex world is like driving a car down a mountain highway, blindfolded, guided only by the belief that the road will remain straight forever. Embracing the fractal nature of reality. If the bell curve is broken, what should we use instead? Taleb introduces us to the mathematics of Benoit Mandelbrot and the concept of fractals. A fractal is a geometric shape that can be split into parts, each of which is a reduced-size copy of the whole. You see fractals everywhere in nature, in the branching of trees, the structure of snowflakes, and the jagged edges of coastlines. Mandelbrotian mathematics, unlike the bell curve, actually embraces the rough, chaotic, and extreme nature of the world. Fractal geometry assumes that extreme variations are just a normal part of the landscape. While it cannot predict exactly when a black swan will occur, it provides a mathematical framework that at least acknowledges their existence. It forces you to realize that a 10% move in the market is not a statistical anomaly. It is a natural feature of the system. By shifting your worldview from the smooth, predictable bell curve to the jagged, chaotic, fractal geometry of nature, you stop being surprised by volatility. You learn to expect the extreme. You realize that peace and stability are the true anomalies, while chaos and disruption are the baseline reality of Extremistan. How to live in a black swan world. So, we live in a world governed by unpredictable, massive impact events. Our brains are wired to deceive us with neat narratives. Our experts are arrogant and blind. And the mathematical models used by our institutions are fundamentally flawed. This sounds incredibly depressing, does it not? But Taleb did not write this book to make us despair. He wrote it to make us robust. If you cannot predict the black swan, your only logical course of action is to position yourself so that you survive the negative ones and benefit from the positive ones. This is a massive paradigm shift. Stop trying to predict the rain and start building an ark. The goal is to design a life, a business, and a portfolio that is not fragile to unexpected shocks. To do this, Taleb introduces the barbell strategy. Imagine a weightlifting barbell. It has heavy weights on the extreme left and heavy weights on the extreme right, with absolutely nothing in the middle. This is how you should structure your exposure to risk. You must completely avoid the middle ground, because the middle ground is where you get wiped out by the illusion of safety. On one side of your barbell, you place 85 to 90% of your assets, your time or your energy, into extremely safe, hyper-conservative vehicles. We are talking about government treasury bills, guaranteed deposits, or a highly stable day job. This side of the barbell guarantees your survival. It ensures that no matter what kind of negative black swan hits the market, you will not be destroyed. You will not lose your home. You will survive. On the other side of the barbell, you take the remaining 10 to 15% of your resources and you invest them in highly speculative, extremely risky ventures that have massive, unlimited upside potential. This could be venture capital, starting a disruptive tech company, or investing in deep, out-of-the-money options. You expose yourself to positive black swans. If the risky investments fail, your losses are strictly capped. You only lose that 10%. But if one of those risky investments catches a positive black swan, the returns are astronomical. You achieve massive growth without ever risking absolute ruin. The barbell strategy allows you to stop worrying about predicting the future because your survival is guaranteed on one side and your potential for exponential growth is secured on the other. Cultivating positive asymmetry. Living a black swan life is about actively hunting for positive asymmetry. Asymmetry means the upside and the downside are not equal. You want to place yourself in situations where the cost of failure is very small, but the reward for success is incredibly large. Attending a party where you might meet a highly influential person is an asymmetrical opportunity. The downside is a few hours of boredom. The upside is a relationship that completely changes your career. Writing a book or creating a piece of software is asymmetrical. It costs you a few months of effort. But if it catches a positive black swan and goes viral, the rewards are infinite. Taleb urges us to maximize our exposure to these positive accidents. Tinkering, experimenting, and trying new things are the ultimate strategies. For a complex world, you do not need a grand master plan for your life, because grand plans are fragile to unpredictable events. Instead, you need a process of continuous trial and error. Make a lot of small mistakes. Fail quickly and cheaply. Every small failure provides you with valuable information, and eventually, one of your experiments will strike gold. Escaping the predictable life. Finally, Taleb challenges us to embrace the beauty of the unknown. We spend so much of our lives trying to sterilize our environment. We want predictable schedules, predictable careers, and predictable investments. But a completely predictable life is not only an illusion, it is fundamentally boring. By accepting that we are living in Extremistan, we free ourselves from the anxiety of trying to control everything. We learn to laugh at the talking heads on television who pretend they know what the stock market will do. Tomorrow, we learn to be skeptical of neat, tidy historical narratives. We stop acting like the Thanksgiving turkey, blindly trusting the farmer, and we start looking around the barn with our eyes wide open. The Black Swan is not a message of doom. It is a manual for ultimate freedom. It teaches you to build a fortress of personal robustness, to cap your downside, and to expose your sails to the winds of massive, positive outliers. The world is wild, chaotic, and beautiful. Do not try to tame it. Try to survive its wrath, and position yourself to ride its massive, unpredictable waves. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the chaotic and profound world of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I hope this summary completely shifts the way you view risk, history, and the future. If you found value in this breakdown and want to continue exploring the greatest ideas in literature and philosophy, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Remember, stay robust, keep your downside protected, and always keep an eye out for the unexpected.